Hello everyone, it's great to have you with us for our webinar today on buying a French property and moving to France. My name's Karen Tate. I shall be your host for the next hour. I'm a freelance journalist in the UK. I've been editing French property news for the past 20 odd years, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times. I'm joined by our panel of experts, so I shall just hand over to them to introduce themselves. So, Joanna.
Hi everyone and welcome to this evening. I'm Joanna Leggett, so I'm part of the Leggett family. We're estate agents based in France. We've got 650 agents now all across different areas of France. So we're here to help you with your move, find you the right property and get you sort of relocated along with our panel here today. So welcome, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thanks, Joanna. And Tracy?
Yes, my name is Tracy. I'm a relocation expert. I'm in the south of the France for almost 35 years now, and it's my job and that of writing my LPS to help you who want to move, live, or create a business in France, to help you with a paperwork path and get moving. Thank you for this evening.
Thanks, Tracy. That was sounding wrong to me. Was that sounding bad to everybody else?
Yeah, you could only make a few words.
An issue. If it's bad later, I'll say again, and you may have to switch off your video if it continues. But thanks anyway. So Tracy is an expert in relocation, visas, admin, all those kind of things. If people missed that. So Sharon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Karen. I'm Sharon Roll. I'm a French mortgage broker. I head up the international team at CAFP, and I have 22 years experience in helping non-resident and expat buyers obtain French property finance, and are able to guide people from the beginning, establishing how much they can borrow, right to the end of the process with regards to obtaining a mortgage. So hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions tonight. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Sharon. And Helen?
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. I'm Helen Harrop and I work both for AXA Agence International and also L'Onomie, both of which are insurance specialists in France, working largely or mostly with English-speaking clients just to help you get settled here. Not the most exciting thing. I've been in France for 13 years and I'm doing this job for 8 years.
Thanks, Helen. And Amanda?
Good evening, everybody. My name's Amanda Johnson. I've been a partner at the Spectrum IFA Group I'm in my 17th year, goodness me, quite a long time. And I've been in France for 20 years. And Spectrum, what we do is we help people with their investments, we help them with their pensions and anything that you would have an international, we're international financial advisors here in France. And I've got lots of colleagues throughout France, so wherever you end up in, there'll be somebody local to you. And I'm looking forward also to answering the questions. So thank you, Karen.
Lovely, thanks, Amanda. And Jonathan?
Yes, good evening, Karen. Good evening, panelists. I'm also very excited for this evening to answer some questions. So my name is Jonathan. I'm a senior trader at Lumon. Lumon is an international payment provider specialising in payments in and out of France. We've been in business 26 years. I've been here 16 years, helped thousands, tens of thousands of people moving money in and out of France. Really interested in France. I was there skiing a few weeks ago. And also like to get there in the summer as well, of course, the world's most popular tourist destination with good reason. I'm also very interested in the currency markets, and that's my area of speciality. So here to answer your questions, but I also want to ask you some questions. We just launched a poll regarding when you might be looking at buying property over in France, just really to try and get an understanding, please, audience, of where you might be in that buying process. Buying property in France you're typically looking at a good sort of 2 to 3 months from acceptance of the offer, signing some paperwork and moving to the completion, what's called the acte de vente. We know these things don't happen overnight, and it's just good for us to be able to share really relevant information as to where you might be in that buying process. So yeah, fairly even split there on the questions in terms of about 25% already in France now looking. That's good. Some eager beavers out there, but also some people looking later in the year. And the whole idea of this webinar really to give you as much information as possible wherever you might be in that process. So thank you very much everyone who's answered that poll. Second one we're going to launch is to do with the financial side, when you might be in a position to put forward an offer. As mentioned, of course, you don't just buy a property overnight, and the finance aspect is also very important with this, because between having that offer accepted, signing the initial contract, the compromis de vente, and the acte de vente, lots can be happening in the currency markets, and as we'll explain a little bit later on, there's lots of clever things that you can do to try and manage the risk that rates can be moving around. So we'll certainly discuss that in more detail. But yes, looks like lots of people with money ready to go to buy their dream home. So you're in good company this evening. And then the final poll, just in terms of where you might be from in the world, joining us from this evening. Doesn't matter where you're from in the world, the French buying process is exactly the same, but there can be slight nuances. Get my French in there. There can be slight changes to do with banking and of course other factors that can affect where you're coming from. So looking about half of the audience from the UK, but a large portion from America, just over 35% there, and then wider Europe and the rest of the world. So I'm sure everyone's going to find plenty of good information wherever you're from. So thank you very much, audience, for answering those polls. And back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Jonathan. So thank you to everyone for sending in so many questions. We'll get started on them now. You'll also notice there's a box to the right hand of your screen. You can add in any questions there at any point during the webinar too. We'll try and get round to as many as possible as we can. So let's start off with a buying question for Joanna. Lorraine Williams asks, if you make an offer and it's accepted, are you bound to that property? And also, is it okay to put low offers forward on a property, or is that frowned upon?
No, I would always take, with regards to offers, I would take the advice of your agent, your buying agent. You can also look on Notaires de France if you weren't buying through an agent and were buying privately, and you can see what the average house price is per square metre for the town and the area that you're actually buying in, so you'll know if it's overpriced or at the right price. I would always take advice because I mean, there's a lot of TV programs, particularly in the UK, there are people putting cheeky offers and, you know, and they sometimes get accepted. That doesn't always happen. And sometimes, particularly with French vendors, you can insult them by putting in a very low offer, or a cheeky offer as it's known, when they've spent a lot of money on the property. And then even if you upped your offer, they may not accept it. So you have to be very careful and you have to take advice. An agent would always tell you if we think that they would take an offer, and we would always advise you if we think the price is too high, which we would have told the vendor as well. Sometimes they have put a lot of money into the property and they're expecting to get it back, but we'll always advise them that there is a ceiling on properties. They're not all chateaus, they're not all, you know, reaching the price that people may have spent on the property. So we'll always advise you, yes, of course, you can put offers in. We usually say sort of 5 to 10%. However, if the property's already been dropped and it's at a price to sell price, then they're probably not going to drop any lower. But we can always advise you, as an agent, we work for the seller and for the buyer. So we're completely neutral in that respect, and we will advise you on what we think would be a good offer. Of course, you can try, and with properties that are sort of run down or inheritance properties, or, you know, needing a lot of renovation, there's more likelihood that you will get an offer. If it's an exclusive property and it's priced really fairly, it's unlikely that they'll take an offer. They'll wait for the asking price. You don't have to go over the asking price in France. In fact, you can't. The asking price is the mandated price, and if you put in the offer at the mandated price, then you will get the property. There we go.
Unmute
Karen, we've
myself.
lost your sound. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just muted. Thanks, Joanna, and that's a really good reassuring point for people to know that they're not necessarily going to get into a bidding war if they offer the asking price. That property should be theirs. Okay, so let's move on to a question for Tracy, who I believe is still with us, just turned off her camera to help with the sound. It's from Irene Blackhall in the UK, says, are you able to get a long-term visa on the strength of having paid a deposit on a French property, or do you need anything else? And Ian Jones also asks, if I buy a property home to live in France, am I guaranteed a permanent visa?
Thanks, Karen. And can you hear me okay? Because I know we've had a bit of technical difficulty.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And sorry about that. So yeah, very good questions. I think I'll probably just mix it up a little bit and explain that. Obviously, when it comes to visas for moving to France, there's no guarantee of a visa, no matter what your situation is. And nobody should tell you that there is a guarantee of a visa. It's really down to your file and how it's presented and what it contains. So no matter what your living situation, there's certain criteria for a visa. And of course, depending on which visa you're applying for, those criteria will change. So from a property perspective, obviously, one of the first criteria is you need to have an address for a visa when you're applying for a long stay visa, be that a non-working or a working, and that could be rental or buying. Now, does deposit or putting a down payment on a property help your file? Yes, it helps from the fact you have an address. It also shows that you've invested in France, of course. It is a positive aspect on your file in that you can show you're buying a property. If you haven't actually got the deeds and only the actual compromis de vente, the pre-sales agreement, it's always good to have a letter from the notary or from your agent saying when you will be signing to add a bit more weight to the fact that you're buying a property. It also helps from a financial perspective, especially if you're a cash buyer, of course, because you can put that as part of your financial criteria. They will take into account that you don't have a monthly mortgage coming out. So it can help from a financial, especially for people who don't have necessarily revenue. Okay, so it doesn't guarantee visas. Nothing does guarantee visas. The only thing you can do is put the best possible file together with the most important information. What you do need to show when it comes to other documents would be that you're not a burden on the healthcare system. So of course, Helen will talk about that later. Private insurance if you're coming on a long stay visitors visa. And financially, you have to have sufficient funds if you're applying for a 1 year to live for a year in France without being a burden on the French society. So those are the two. And of course, the address can be proved with other means. But yes, I guess the answer would be if you are buying a property, it helps from an investment perspective, showing that you've got a foot in France and you want to stay permanently. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Tracy. That's great. So a question for Sharon now. Wael Awad says, can you get a mortgage in France if you already have a mortgage in the UK?
Okay, thanks, Karen. Thanks for the question. Yes, you can, absolutely. How French mortgages work is really on affordability criteria. So it's going to depend on your individual situation, how much your income is, how much your UK mortgage is. It could be a UK mortgage, it could be a US mortgage. The French banks have to look at the affordability of the mortgage, and they will quite simply look at, amongst other things, debt to income ratio. To explain very in basic terms, your monthly debt related outgoings, so your existing UK mortgage, minimum credit card payments, loan payments, the new French mortgage, shouldn't be any more than 35% of your net taxable income. So if having a UK mortgage means that you're not up to 35% debt to income ratio, then it means that you have room left to have a new French mortgage. However, if your UK mortgage and your other debt related outgoings are already more than 35% of your net taxable income, then that means there's no room left for a new mortgage. So that's the basis of how French lenders calculate how much you can borrow. Afterwards, it depends if your UK mortgage is an interest-only mortgage. Some lenders may do a stress test and convert it to capital repayment. Sometimes that's where we see property investors come unstuck, for example. If you're on a low interest rate, like in the UK, I know lenders attract you with rates as low as 3%, 2% for a fixed rate for the first couple of years, and then you go into the standard variable. Some lenders will do a stress test on that and test your rate as if it was 5%. Each lender in France is different, and that's why it's important to get proper advice for your individual situation so that you know how much you can borrow. But it's not a stop. Oh, sorry, I can't speak English. Let's speak in French. It's not. I've just changed words completely. It's not going to ruin your chances of getting a French mortgage if you already have a UK mortgage. In fact, if you already own a UK property, it actually improves your file in the French bank, because lenders like to see that you already have a property that you own. So it can be a positive as well. So sorry about the English.
That was a very, very good answer in English. Probably you meant deal breaker. So it's not a deal breaker to have a UK mortgage and a French mortgage, but the earlier you seek advice from a broker, the better. So you know your situation. So we've got a question for Helen now, an insurance one. Sherilyn Baylor says, once I've purchased a property in France, will I be required to have homeowners insurance? So I guess that's, do you have to have homeowners insurance, and should you?
Well, that two different questions, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's a different, if you're renting, so just taking a step back, because I know that question was about buying, and I will answer that in a second. But if you're renting, you are legally obliged to have insurance, and you'll need to have that in place probably before you'll get the keys, because they need to know that that you're covered, because there is a synergy between a renter's insurance and the insurance of the owner. If you're buying, it's a little bit trickier. Legally, you're not necessarily obliged to have insurance for your property. However, I think you'll find in most cases the notaire will ask you for a certificate of insurance for when you're signing. And really, do you really want to start your new life in a new country without insuring the property that you're putting all your kind of heart and soul into, is what I would say. And French insurance is going to protect you against climatic events, against natural catastrophes, and specifically climatic events, I think, if we're looking at the events of the last few weeks as well. So most notaires are going to ask you to have that certificate for the day of signing as well.
Lovely, thanks, Helen. And as you say, do you really want to be uninsured when you've just paid lots of money for your French property, your savings and so on?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
with all the rain that France has had in the last few months,
But definitely worth making sure you have a conversation with somebody who understands the insurance in France to make sure that you get what you need, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Helen. So a question for Amanda now. Frank Fauvarg, apologies if I've pronounced that wrong, wants to know if there's an optimum time to move to France to simplify the change in tax regimes. He's in the UK. So is it best to move at the start or the end of the tax year, for example? And I know different countries have different tax years. So how does that work?
Okay, so I think from a French point of view, when you arrive in France, there'll be a date, and it really doesn't matter because you won't pay any tax in France up to that date that you moved here. Okay, so for example, myself, when I moved to France, we moved in the April, and that fitted with the UK tax return, April to April. However, when we completed our first tax return in France, we go January to December. So therefore, all we had to do was from earnings from April to the December. But I think what's really important, and I think it's more important because that's just looking at the dates, and that's fine. What's more important is to make sure that so for example, if you're living in the UK, and you've got some tax-free investments in the UK, that you finish off your affairs in the country that you're in before you then come to France. and then you become tax resident here because you don't want to be bringing something that was tax efficient in the UK across to France, which is therefore not tax efficient, and finding yourself with a tax bill. So I think it's more important to seek financial advice about the timings of investments, and if you were selling a second property, all those things are far more important than whether you came in the January or the April. So does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. That was a great answer. Tax advice on the types of investments and income you have is more important than the specific date you move then. Lovely. Okay. Jonathan, a currency question for you now. Colleen Mahoney says, do you require a French bank account in order to purchase a holiday home?
No, you don't. Often quite a common assumption, people have had a offer accepted, or they're, in the throes of buying, and yeah, I need to get some euros, I need to have a French bank. Ultimately, it's helpful to have a French bank by the time you're completing, and we've got some partners we work with we can introduce you to, but we talked earlier about the sort of time from offer being accepted and the compromis de vente to the acte de vente. We actually have a really good solution there. So first step in dealing with Lumon, when you come to us, it's to register totally free of charge, and then you get immediate access to what we call a Euro wallet. So a helpful way to think of us is like a middleman. We have a sterling account if you're transferring pounds. If it was US dollars, we'd give you a dollar account. So you send your base currency to us, and then you've got, as I say, instant access to this Euro wallet. It's essentially a Euro client account, sometimes called an escrow account or client accounts. So we operate these types of accounts, segregated bank accounts, and yes, you have access to it as a client of ours, and you can use that for your payments. So if you're paying the notaire, by the way, we work with all the notaires that Leggett would be working with, and throughout France there are lots of different notaires. We know them, they know the Lumen accounts, so it's the same day payment directly for that deposit, and any other payments that you might need. So if you're buying a car, if you're getting some building work done, if you're going to rent, first of all, you want to pay to someone to pay the rent each month, you can use this Euro account that you have with us. It's not technically your own bank account, but you can very much use it like it is one for these early payments. And most clients will actually find it much easier to use this rather than a French bank, particularly with a larger amount of money. If we're now talking about the completion stage, if you've got hundreds of thousands of euros that you have put into a French bank, well, then you've got to transfer it to the notaire, to the solicitor. And just like in France, just like in the UK, the States, all over the world, often with a very large amount of money, when we're talking for property deals, you might have daily limits, you might have to go into the bank, you might have to book an appointment to actually get that money from the French bank account to the notaire. So with the Lumon wallet, you can just pay it direct. We've got obviously security checks and things we'll go through with you, but it's just a much simpler process trying to deal with the French bank yourself. So not attacking French banks, you'll need one for your bills and utilities and things like that, and living costs, etc. But it's not a sort of panic as soon as you're having an offer accepted to necessarily do that, although we can introduce you to a partner who can help. But yes, we can offer this Euro wallet, and that's much easier.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's great to know there is that flexibility that, if you're worried about opening a bank account at the start, you can use this currency wallet instead. Okay, so we've got another buying question for Joanna. David Harris in the UK wants to know, is the Languedoc still a good investment? So how can buyers tell if a particular area is a good investment, or France as a whole?
Well, we produce market reports nearly every month on different areas and the state of the market, etc. There's loads of information that you can get online as well from reliable research sources. This year, they're predicting the market is going to be much stronger than last year. 2026 is going to be stronger. They're looking at increases in some areas from 3 to 5% in property prices, and they're looking at over 1 million sales, which, you know, it's been sort of floating from 800, 960, and they're looking at it going up to 1 million. So it is a strong market. Mortgage rates, as Sharon will tell you, are good, and you know, the market has started moving again. They were quite low. The mortgage rates are really low, so it did kind of stop the French moving because they got such good rates. It was silly to move, but again, everybody does need to move, and they're moving again. The Languedoc-Roussillon is a massively popular area. It's the south of France, but it isn't the south of France with the very expensive prices that you'd get on the Riviera. So it's normally a really, really good choice. It's got beautiful history. You've got the Qatar castles, you've got Carcassonne itself, for example. You've got the, you know, hundreds of hours of sunshine. So yes, Languedoc has always been a favourite for lots of nationalities, particularly British, Dutch, Germans and Americans, very popular area for that. And we won't be seeing any of the main areas in the southwest of France, the south of France, Brittany, all normally going down this year. So it's a very good time to buy, and you may see increases coming through, particularly in some cities this year. But Languedoc is a fantastic place to buy, and for resale purposes, we have no problem in reselling in the Languedoc at all. In fact, we even have an office down there in Carcassonne.
Which I have been into. It's a very nice office, a beautiful city. I think it's fair to say as well that most overseas buyers don't buy a French property as an investment in that sense. It's a lifestyle investment. It's an investment in time spent over their holidays, if it's a holiday home or a whole new way of life. It's more about enjoying the property than getting your bucks out of it. But as you said, Joanna, there is lots of information online, including your reports that people can look at if you want to make sure that you're making a sound investment.
Exactly, and I think as well it's worth mentioning that property prices don't have huge drops or huge highs like they do, particularly in the UK, where they can drop right down and then go right back up. France is really, really stable, and it always has been as a property market. And as you say, it's a lifestyle choice to come to France. You're not going to see great highs unless you're buying in cities like Paris or Bordeaux, for example, or great lows. But Languedoc is a fab area, and yeah, exactly, it's a lifestyle choice.
Lovely, thank you. And I definitely agree that Languedoc is a beautiful area. We could talk all for an hour just about that alone. But let's move on to a question for Tracy, if you're still with us, Tracy. Stephen John Ellis wants to know, how does EU citizenship work for partners of Irish citizens, with Ireland, of course, being in the EU?
Excellent. So this is actually, this obviously will apply to anybody who is partnered with an EU passport holder, Irish obviously being one of them, but there are many people who reach out to us who have EU spouses. Obviously for the EU passport holder, they have freedom of movement within Europe, so they can do whatever they want. They don't have to do any formalities when they first arrive in France. For the partner, it really, as you said, it was the partner, it kind of brings up a few questions, because if you are married to your EU passport holder, shall I put it that way, then that does allow you to come to France without a visa with your EU spouse passport holder and apply for your residency card in France attaching to an EU family member. That process itself to your married partner, it will take about 6 to 8 months, so be aware of that. It is not a short process, and the Irish passport holder, your partner, needs to have a stable situation in France financially to support the non-EU passport holder. So that's if you're married. It doesn't give the non-EU partner freedom of movement within Europe, but it does give them residency rights within France. The problem applies though when it's a partner, and I'm not sure if that means paxed or just, you know, cohabitating, because is that a word actually, cohabitating? I might have made that up between French and English. I apologise, I've lived here for too long. But if you're paxed, that's a legally binding document and you can still apply through the same process, but I would highly advise you to be paxed for a minimum of 12 months, because the prefectures in France, they can attach you as a family member, but they have the right and to do what they want on these type of files. But a pax does add legal weight, so that is fine if you've been paxed for 12 months. If you are not married and not paxed and you are living together for many, many years as common law husband and wife, as we used to call it back in the day, then you can try and add as an EU spouse. But again, the prefecture has the ultimate decision and they have a discretionary basis on those type of files. So it really is down to the prefecture if they will accept the fact that you've been living together for 15 years in the UK and then you come into France and living together. So I would highly advise anybody in that situation to get either paxed or married. So I shall become a marriage guidance counsellor now.
Thanks, Tracy. So a question for Sharon now from Geraldine Byrne. She would like to know how you can get a mortgage in France as an EU citizen for a holiday home. And Sally Lambourne in the UK, she also asks, how do I get a French mortgage? Where do I start? So maybe you could answer both of those questions in one. Ish.
Yep, sure. And I am going to try and answer them in English. I'm really, really sorry. It's been a long day. So, Geraldine, Sally, good questions. You start by speaking to somebody like me, a broker, who can look at the whole of market for you, and then we can give you all of the information that you need in one go, rather than you having to traipse around and speak to 100 different people, different banks, and get lots of different answers. Don't start by looking on the internet and going on forums and saying, oh, I can do this, I can do that, because it's not one size fits all and everybody's situation is different. And that's the real key piece of advice I would give you. In terms of applying for the mortgage and finding out how much you can borrow, I talked earlier about the debt to income ratio. That's one part of the mortgage lending criteria. Another part is how much money you have to put into the project. You will need some sort of down payment, personal contribution to the mortgage. The lenders will also look at how much you have in savings left over once you purchase, how your property, how your household is made up, how many dependents you have, what will happen to your income. You're buying a holiday home, will you have rental income from that holiday home? Where is the property located? So in terms of how to get a mortgage and where to start at the beginning, find out how much you can borrow and what's available to you. Because you might want to buy a property in the Languedoc, but you might want to buy a property somewhere in the middle of France, in the Auvergne, and mortgages are going to be different. That's not necessarily the same banks, because some banks in France are national and some are regional. So what might be available to you in the Languedoc may not be available to you elsewhere in France. So it's really important to get an understanding of what's available to you based on your project and speak to somebody. Where's your personal contribution going to come from? If you're going to do equity release in the UK, for example, that could cause a problem for a French mortgage lender. If you're going to rent out the property and the property is a low energy rating, like an F or a G, that can cause a problem for some other mortgage lenders. So all of the advice that you need to get really needs to be based on you and your individual situation. In terms of mortgage rates, Joanna mentioned quickly, so I'm just going to bounce back onto mortgage rates. Interest rates here are very low at the moment. We're generally talking about 3.6 to 4.2%, and that's fixed for the entire duration of your mortgage. So you could potentially get a mortgage rate of 4% and under for 25 years as well. So it's definitely worth exploring all of your options in France when you're looking to purchase a property. So I hope I've answered the question, Karen.
Absolutely. Lovely. Thanks, Sharon. No, it was a great answer. Clearly, it's when you're applying for a mortgage, because the lender will want to know as much as possible about you. It's good to get started as early as possible, so you can get all your documents and information together for the broker and speak to an experienced broker, of course. Okay, so let's have a question for Helen now. Fiona Wolstenholme wants to know the best way to relocate to France as an unmarried, permanent, retired resident with health issues. I mean, there's a lot of different things in there, but perhaps you could talk about, you know, from a healthcare perspective.
There's a lot to unpack there. I think the first thing I'll start with is what you need if you're applying for a visa, because Tracy alluded to that earlier on, which is when you're applying for a visa to come and live in France, one of the criteria is going to be that you have healthcare. Now, for most people, that's going to be a private insurance, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But any of the listeners who are perhaps from the UK or from Europe, who have worked in the UK or Europe and are of state pension age, they would be eligible for a document we call an S1, which allows you to export your healthcare benefits from your kind of competent state where you worked and get your pension to where you're moving to the UK. And that is a little bit of a golden ticket, I would say, because it allows you to move straight there, to access the health system straight away. And there's a few bits and pieces wrapped up around that you'd need to look at in more detail, but that's one thing to consider. Now, if you don't have access to something like that and you need to move, you're going to need a private insurance. Now, the base requirements of the private insurance you need for a visa are that it has a minimum of 30,000 euros worth of cover, that it includes repatriation, and that it's valid for the full 365 days of the stay. Now, it also needs to be valid in the Schengen zone, but the main thing is that those are the kind of main criteria. Now, within that, there's a real range of policies that you can get. And, you know, at the risk of kind of repeating what we're all saying, there is no one size fits all kind of solution to this. It's going to really depend on you, on your condition, on your situation. Now, so I've spoken to people who have access to, say, Medicare in the US, and it's not suitable to use for your visa application, but it does mean you can still access some healthcare kind of for short periods while you're kind of getting registered in the French system. So it's really important that you speak to somebody who does this regularly, particularly if you have concerns, so that they can look at your individual situation. Now, the actual types of insurance that are available for a visa application vary from kind of basic annual policies that are a one-off payment that will get you your visa, but they are quite basic, accident emergency only, right up to really expensive, all singing, all dancing, monthly rolling policies that will get you covered for just about everything. I will say as a caution, you can get policies that cover pre-existing conditions, but there are some pre-existing conditions that you will find it very difficult to get cover for a policy, a temporary policy while you're moving to France. And I think in that situation, then you've got to start looking pragmatically about how you manage your first few months in France. Do you have the funds to access medical professionals? How can you get hold of your medications? Do a little bit of research about your medications, how readily available they are in France, what kind of cost they are, and kind of prepare yourself, I think, before you come.
Thanks, Helen. That's excellent advice. Very thought-provoking. Okay, so a question for Amanda now. Peter Borrowdale Cox says, we are UK citizens. Our investments are in the USA and we live in England. What are the tax considerations? And I presume he means if they move to France. So that's quite
I was hoping that it was going to be the move to France. So it's a good question, Peter. So I've got a few more questions to fire back at you, and obviously he can contact me afterwards and I can have a look on a case by case. So UK citizens moving to France. It said you got US investments. So the question is, are the investments just in dollars, or are they actually held in the US? And I'm just trying to work out, if you live in the UK, why you would have investments in the US. But let's assume that for whatever reason that you worked in the US and you've kept your you worked over there for a while and you're now back in the UK. So from the tax consideration here in France, okay, what we have to have a look at is timing is everything. So when you become French tax resident, any income that you have, you're taxed on your worldwide. It feels like it's a wild world at the minute, doesn't it? Your worldwide income, and that includes your investments. So if you have your investments in the US, then you would need to declare what the gain's been and so forth. However, in France, there are lots of things that you can do in multi-currencies, because obviously we know that the price of the dollar has fallen over the last 6 months, and it might not be, again, timing for you to move out of your US investments right now. So it's a case of working with a professional to work out what would the tax be, and is it best to leave what you've got where it is until maybe the markets are a little bit better, or the currency rate is better. So I'm not giving you a really straightforward answer, apart from the tax consideration. If you're still holding them in dollars and you move to France, then you're going to have to declare that income. And even if you haven't drawn the income and all you've done is the money's grown, you have to declare the growth. So if you speak to somebody like myself, we can actually have a look at it and make sure that before you move to France, that you're putting all your ducks in a row, so you're not unintentionally bringing and having more tax to pay over here. But I'd be interested to know why, as a living in the UK and UK citizens, you hold assets, investment assets in the USA. But
I guess, I mean, this is, you know, obviously it throws up more questions than answers in a way, but I guess to an extent, the answer would be the same if the investments were in the UK. If you were moving to France, the same, you'd be looking at the same things, wouldn't you? Whether those things are tax efficient investments, move to France, whether it's better to move them to France, and so on.
Absolutely. And while there are, you know, some really good tax efficient, we can do them in, you know, lots of different currencies and things, I think the main thing is to speak to somebody, because it's the timings of everything. And, you know, yes, you could say, okay, well, I'm going to be more tax efficient when I come to France, but is it the right time for you to come out with those investments that you've already got?
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda.
Welcome.
Still on the subject of money, but currency now, for Jonathan. We have a question. I'm planning on buying a property in France this year. Are exchange rates expected to go up or down? How do you get the best rate? So, short of having a crystal ball, is the market, can you tell if the market's going to go one way or other for currency?
Unfortunately not, Karen. It'd be extremely useful in my job and in the lives of our audience, you know, if they knew exactly the perfect dates to buy their currency. No, it's a bit of a misconception out there. Actually, this question follows on really nicely from Amanda's answer there about timing. So essentially with currency, what causes exchange rates to go up and down? It's different events in the world. As we know, there's been you know, lots of things going on in the world to move exchange rates, political events, economic news. A key factor is changes in interest rates that can make currencies more attractive or less attractive. In terms of trying to forecast, just because we don't fully know what rates are going to do, that isn't a reason to bury your head in the sand, because ultimately the rate that you get when you're buying an overseas property that's what's going to determine how much it costs you. So one of the things we'll do with a client quite early on in the process, so the first step is a registration, totally free of charge to get you set up. And then we'll have a conversation with you really about your sort of attitudes to risk. And it is quite similar to some of the points Amanda was making there about understanding clients. Everyone's an individual. Everyone's going to have their own attitudes to their money and how they want to deal with things. But very simply, we're going to look at, for a client, a less risky strategy. So if you're on a tight budget, you can't afford for the rates to drop. The last thing you want to do is sign your compromise on, wait 3 months for the active on, and then find that you go to pay your money on that day and the rates have dropped. You know, that's obviously going to be a very stressful situation. So in that scenario, we have some different options to fix the rate in advance. If you're hopeful the rates are going to go up, if you're a bit more of a risk taker, you might just buy half of your currency quite early on. You can fix it in the wallet. You can do one of these forward contracts. There's all sorts of clever things you can do to lock in a rate early, but then you might leave the opportunity to buy if rates then suddenly go up. And we offer a real personal service to monitor exchange rates, to monitor important events. So we might have interest rate decisions from the Bank of England, in the United States, in the Eurozone. And these are all events where you can just suddenly see the rate going up, and we'll be on the phone to our clients to let them know of any changes. So you can try and buy at those better points. But unfortunately, there's no guaranteed outcome from where rates are going to go. Another bit of information we can give clients is some very detailed research from some leading banks on where exchange rates are forecast to head. All of the big names in banking, they all produce their own research. And actually, when I look at this data, it just underlines how even these so-called experts don't know what rates are going to go to. So if we look at pound-euro levels over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, there's a 10-cent difference between the high and the low. You've got Bank of America, they're quite positive on pound-euro levels. They think it could go to 120. We're about 114 at the moment. It's quite a nice improvement there. Great news for any British buyers in France if you're listening to Bank of America. But then you've got BNP Paribas, the French bank. They think it's going to go down to 108. Now, if you're looking at a 250,000 euro property purchase in France with pounds, that difference between those two forecasts is about £20,000. So that could play real havoc with your budget, you know, trying to really pinpoint that exact moment. So what we'll do is just have a conversation with clients. We can let them know some of these forecasts. We can keep a really close eye on the rates to let them know what's happening. And then we've got these different tools to try and help lock in. A large portion of our audience was our American friends. And just to give you some numbers there, some of the more positive outlooks on the rates are from Crédit Agricole, the French bank. They think that the US dollar euro rate is going to drop about 4 or 5 cents. Some of the less positive forecasts on the dollar are actually from Goldman Sachs, American bank there. They think the rate could drop about 7 cents. And the difference again in these forecasts between all of these different banks, between the high and the low, on a 250,000 euro purchase with US dollars, it works out at about $30,000 difference. So again, just shows you how tricky it can be to fully forecast this. What we'll do for clients as well is we'll look at all of these different forecasts from these banks, and we can look at an average. I might be getting a bit technical here, but some people really like to go through this detail on the rates to really try and help them make an informed choice. I can tell you for both the pound and the dollar against the euro, the averages for both of those currencies does seem to suggest that the euro could be a bit more expensive later in the year. So I don't know if that's definitely going to happen. I'm not definitely saying that will happen, but there is research that does back that up that we can share with clients. So again, what we'll do to try and help you work out the best time is have a conversation with you about what sort of rate you're ideally looking for, what kind of risk you're comfortable with, and then we've got some different tools we can use to lock in the rate so that it's one you're comfortable with. You're not going to have any embarrassing calls to Joanna Leggett or anyone else at Leggett that the rates have moved and the property's got more expensive. and we'll just make sure that property transaction goes through as smoothly as possible.
Lovely, thanks, Jonathan. So a question for Joanna now about buying apartments. Kathleen Eubanks asks how you can deal with a homeowners association, known as a syndic in French, when you're buying an apartment if you're not fluent in French, and what else should buyers take into consideration and when they're buying an apartment rather than a house?
Well, generally speaking, I would always take legal advice from the notaire, because the notaire at the end of the day will be able to give you all of that advice. There'll be co-props, obviously, so co-proprietary, there might be costs involved, there might be management costs for looking after the grounds or looking after the roof, etc., if it's on buildings. But all of this will be, we will have all of this information if we're selling an apartment anywhere. We'll be able to give you what the cost of that is, you know, and obviously we generally would try and make an appointment with a notaire an hour before signing anyway, so that you could ask all those questions, or come out beforehand and have a sit down with the notaire and get it all legally set up. And also with regards for, I think probably Amanda, with inheritance and things like that as well, is how you leave the property or the apartment, if it's part of a co-prop, etc., and that type of thing. But to be honest, you know, if you look at the cities, like we've got an office in Nice and Paris and Bordeaux, you know, people are buying apartments all the time. So there's nothing to worry about. It's just getting the right advice. And with our agency, you know, like everybody here on the panel, we've all been in France. We've been running since 1998. So we're used to dealing with all of these kinds of situations, and we can advise you depending on what area you're in, which notaire you need to deal with, etc. So you know, the help is always there, and you know, it's our job. We, you know, bearing in mind 50% of all of our sales are to international clients. Most of those aren't going to speak French, so hence even in our contracts team, you know, we translate all the compromis de vente. We translate the documents so that people can read them in English. We have summaries in English so that people can understand that. And you know, our sales support team are multilingual. In fact, I think there's 20 languages that we speak amongst the team. So whatever nationality you are, that's your agent's role. It's there to help you to get through all of these stages, and to, you know, guide you through with a notaire or any of the panel that are here today, like Tracy from Relocation, for example. You know, there's a panel here of experts that can help, particularly when it's in French. I mean, I came to France with no language. I did Italian at school, so I had to learn right from the beginning. And you know, it's a fabulous language to learn, but you know, without all the help that I had in the beginning, I would have struggled as well. So help is at hand, without a doubt.
Thanks, Joanna. I'm sure that's very reassuring to Kathleen and lots of other people listening in. So we've still got time for a few more questions. Let's see. One for Tracy now. Victoria Harrison says, is it better to move to France while still of working age, or wait until after retirement? And she also asks, are there restrictions on access to school places?
Okay, Victoria, that's a really good couple of questions. So actually, going back to what Joe was just saying, another language, obviously learning the language when you're younger is easier, that's for sure. I came to France 35 years ago and didn't speak a word of French, and I learned that on the go here. So I don't think I'd be able to do it now much later. So is it easier when you're younger or later on at retirement age? Well, of course, it's two very different relocation projects. That's first of all very different visa options. And I guess if you were looking at the option of coming at working age, that would be you would either create a business or have a salaried job in France. That would require a different visa option, like a liberal visa option if you want to be a remote worker, freelance worker, consultancy type thing, or set up a small business, or you want to maybe go down the salaried path and have some sort of talent passport or something like that, salaried. That is a different project. But the good thing about it, of course, it gives a better, stronger residency position. The integration is more intact. you would be obviously in a better tax position from, you know, earning revenue through France, even if your clients were worldwide. So the good thing about coming earlier is that you can certainly lead to a path of citizenship later on, where you can apply to become a French passport holder, and that opens up a whole new realm of, you know, Europe work for yourself and for your children, of course, because they can attach to their parents for citizenship in France. If they're underage, when you do a citizenship file, your children can attach to you. So once you've been 5 years tax paying in France in a good situation, you can then apply for citizenship, which opens the world of a French passport and mobile moving in Europe for yourself and for your children later on. So that's the first thing I would think about, you know, coming across to work in France and at a younger age. I also think for the children, they integrate better at a younger age than an older age, because they can go straight into French school. They can do lots of activities, so the language is easier, and they integrate better at a younger age rather than a later age. From a retirement perspective, of course, you either come when they're younger or you come later on when the children are older doing their own thing and you're going to retire. You don't have the employment issues, of course. You have an easier visa access. Of course, the long stay visitors visa is slightly easier than the other options. But you do have a year-on-year renewal, which you don't have if you're doing a business visa or some sort of salaried visa, which is often 2 4-year residency cards. Whereas if you come on a retirement visa, it's a 1-year renewable. So that would be on the different paths. For the children, they all have a right to education from the age of 3 once they're living in France. There can be no refusal to accept children in a French school, public school, of course, despite any nationality. Of course, you have to be legally living in France, and there are certain documents you have to enroll them in with the local schools, which would be, you know, proof of ID, birth certificates, vaccinations and things like that, so that they cannot refuse children. And it's based to where you're living. So wherever you're going to live, the local school area, the catchment area where your children would go to. So sorry, I tried to go quickly on that one, but it's quite a big one, so I hope that happens.
Thanks, Tracy. Let's see if we can get a few more questions in. Our panelists may have to speak quite quickly or do a very brief answer. So a quick one for Sharon. Daisy Cummins wants to know about conditions for mortgages. She says we're temporarily going from a dual income household down to one household due to caring responsibilities.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Hi, Daisy. I will answer quickly. It's going back to debt to income ratio. So we're going to look, if there's 2 of you buying and only one of you has an income, we're going to look at your income or the person's income, but the overall debt related outgoings for the household, unless you just buy in one person's name. In that case, we will just look at your debt related outgoings. So again, it's going to be based on your individual situation, but it is possible. It's something we can look at for you.
Thanks, Sharon. That was great. Helen, do I have to take out a mutuelle top-up health insurance policy once I've moved to France?
Super quick then. No, there's no legal requirement to have a mutuelle. You're not legally obligated to have one. Just be aware that there are costs not paid by the French state, and you can end up with some quite big bills, particularly if you're in hospital and you don't have a mutuelle at all. So it's, again, like all these things, have a conversation with somebody who understands it well, so at least you understand your risk.
Thanks, Helen. So you don't have to, but it's probably advisable. And one for Amanda. For retirees in the US, along with their pensions, is passive income such as earned interest exempt from French taxes?
Okay, no. So your pension, there will be no French tax, but any investment or earned interest, yes, that's subject to French income tax.
Thank you. That was very quick and concise. And last quick one for Jonathan. We are planning to sell our American property to fund the purchase. Is it best to wait until it's closed, or are there any other options?
So some clients feel more comfortable having cash in the bank from the property sale to then go and purchase in France. you can use a contract called a forward contract to bridge that gap. So for a 5% down payment, you can buy the currency you want, fixing the price up to a year in the future to pay off the 95%. So if you know your US, UK, wherever you're living, property sale is going to go through in say 2 months, you can use a forward contract to fix the price today for when that completes, and then you can tie in your French completion nice and smoothly, get the dog in the back of the car, put the caravan on the back, drive over to France, and it will to work out beautifully, move into your lovely Leggett property. So yes, there are options there.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Jonathan. So that brings us exactly to the end of our hour's webinar. The next one will be on the 18th of March, and you'll receive emails about how to register for that one. And you'll also receive an email recording of this webinar, which is really handy if you want to just listen to some of those answers again, or if you missed anything. So I'm sorry we didn't have time to answer all your questions, but I think we certainly covered a lot in that hour. And if you've got any more questions for our panelists, all their details are on the screen. They'll be really delighted to hear from you and to be able to help you out. So thanks for joining us. I'll just hand over to our panelists to say their farewells. Joanna?
Yeah, bye everyone. Thank you for joining us, and do get in touch. We're here to help you, and we're happy to find your dream home. Thanks.
Thanks. And Tracy?
Yeah, thank you, and so sorry you haven't been able to see me this evening, but I have been listening to everything. And if you have any questions relating to visas or paperwork footprints in France, don't hesitate to reach us at the LBS team. Okay.
Thank you. And Sharon?
Hi everybody, thanks for listening this evening. I hope that you found the webinar useful. You have a great panel of experts in front of you, so don't hesitate to reach out. Planning is really key to making your move and your purchase a success. I'm happy to help with my team with any mortgage related questions, but you really do have a great panel in front of you, and for me it's always a pleasure to listen to all of them as well. I learned so much in other domains which aren't mine, because we're all experts in our own domain. So it's really great. Thanks everybody, and thanks everybody for attending this evening.
Thanks, Sharon. And Helen?
Hi, thanks for having me, everyone. Thank you for listening to the answers. Again, any questions, health care, when you're moving to a foreign country, can be quite a scary aspect. Any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch and we can have a chat.
Thanks, Helen. And Amanda?
Thanks very much for having me, as my mum used to say. Just what everyone else has said, planning is key. Please use any of the panel, because we're here to help and make everything as easy, because we didn't have this when we all bought, and it was really painful. So use all the panel.
Very good point. And Jonathan?
Yes, thank you, Karen, for hosting. As always, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, audience, for joining us. And yes, the currency aspect, that's ultimately what's going to determine how much you're actually paying. So very important, like everyone else says, do get in touch nice and early to learn as much as you can, and then you can make informed decisions about what you're doing.
Thanks, Jonathan. And thanks to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you'll join us next time, and we'll see you then. Bye then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.